External debt is the portion of a country's debts that is borrowed from foreign lenders, including commercial banks, governments, or international financial institutions. The history of external debt in Malaysia. Since the last few decades, a sharp increase has been observed in external debt in several economies. The external debt is growing rapidly in Europe, US, Asian, and most industrialized economies. Malaysia is a country that also focuses on industry. The example of major industry in Malaysia are rubber, palm oil processing, petroleum, and natural gas. In 1970, when the oil crisis started, commercial banks, international institutions, and developed countries lend developing economies. As lending countries strengthened monetary policy and raised foreign capital market rate due to the oil crisis, where developing countries are facing excessive debt accumulation and the burden of paying debts. Most developing countries borrow billions of dollars from developed countries and international financial institutions to cover their investment and fiscal requirements. Some countries manage to repay their debts when they mature, but most do they face the burden of debt repayment and run into long-term indebtedness trap. Malaysia's economy vulnerability stepped up significantly from early 1997 through the period following the onset of the crisis in mid-1997 as market confidence increasingly diminished along with the rest of the region. The Malaysian corporate sector suffered a significant loss of wealth due to the sharp fall in the value of properties and equity used as bank collateral. Corporate income and cash flow also declined, leaving some companies unable to pay their debts. However, Malaysia's trade balance is not much different despite facing an economic crisis in mid-1997. In terms of gross domestic saving, as a percentage of GDP, Malaysia has achieved a good position to face economic recession in 1997 until 1998 with typical fiscal and monetary service performed by the federal government. During the period 2001 until 2008, Malaysia's external debt position has improved substantially. The net international investment position (IPP) of Malaysia strengthened from a large net liabilities position of RM 137.6 billion at the end 2001 to a small net liabilities position of RM 18.2 billion at end 2007. This position improved further to a net assets position of RM 138.3 billion as at end 2008. The improvement in the external position was due to faster accumulation of external financial assets relative to the build-up in the external financial liabilities. Since 2001, the total external financial assets of Malaysia more than tripled to RM 778.4 billion at the end 2008. Meanwhile, the total external financial debt almost doubled during the period 2001 until 2008 to RM 440.1 billion as at end 2008. The increase reflected mainly an inflow of long-term capital as well as foreign investment in the domestic capital market. During this period, Malaysia received a net inflow of FDI at an average on 3.1% of GDP, and the stock of FDI increased from RM 129.1 billion to RM 262 billion as at end 2008, reflecting Malaysia as an attractive destination for FDI. The external debt of the economy continued to be low at 31.8% of GDP as at end 2008, with the debt profile remaining skewed toward a longer maturity structure. In 2018, Malaysia's total external debt has declined to 66.2% of GDP as at end three quarter from a peak of 74.3% of GDP as at end 2016. The bulk of the external debt is by corporations and banks. Foreign currency dominate external debt stood at 46.0% of GDP at end of quarter 3 2018. compared to a high of 60% of GDP in 1997. As Asian financial crisis, as a note, the government foreign currency denomination external debt is very low, while the risk surrounding external financial condition have increased. The risk of Malaysia external debt, including short-term external debt, remains managed. This is supported by a favorable external debt profile and resilient repayment capacity of the borrower.
There are several purposes for a country to borrow about. The external debt is divided into two, namely the public sector and the private sector. Among the purpose of external debt for the public sector is to maintain financial liquidity and stimulate economic growth. The tendency to choose external financing or external borrowing is high when there is a leak in financial flow that is limited saving and domestic capital to achieve economic development goals, that is to maintain economic growth. Based on several factors that affect economic growth, such as human resources or labor, capital, and technology, based on the production input of a country that is in short supply, encourage the government to obtain loan from abroad. For example, technology that cannot increase the production of a product open up space for the government to borrow about to increase the level of domestic technology and knowledge. The purpose of country, including Malaysia, is to borrow about because it want to stabilize the trade balance. The economic crisis in the mid 1990 century, most country borrowed about to solve the problem of trade balance. For example, import exceed export. Country in the Malaysia region mostly issues foreign loan, but unlike Malaysia at the time, Malaysia trade balance was not very different despite facing the economic crisis in the mid 1990s century. Okay, the next purpose is to finance tax revenue collection delay. This is said to be so because delay in tax revenue collection forced the government to fund operating expense. For example, Malaysia tax collection as of July 2021 show that only about half of the amount targeted by the government in 2021. And the Finance Ministry said in a statement that direct tax collection recorded during the period was 67.4 billion ringgit Malaysia, or 56.2% of the set target. The target revenue collection target set by the government in 2021 is 162.1 billion ringgit Malaysia, which is 10.3% of gross domestic product, comprising direct tax collection of 120 billion ringgit Malaysia and indirect tax of 42.1 billion ringgit Malaysia. In addition, the purpose of borrowing foreign debt is to cover the country's economic development expenditure. To finance national development expenditure, to the national revenue obtained is just enough to finance operating expenditure. This is said to be so because operating expenditure is higher than development expenditure. The proof is that for 2019, the allocation for government operating expenditure increased by 24.6 billion Malaysia ringgit compared to 234.23 billion in 2018, while development expenditure saw an increase of 8 billion ringgit Malaysia compared to 48 billion in 2018. Uh, Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad has stated that the government is facing problem in reduction its operating expenditure. Okay, then its aim for income distribution through development projects. Government loans are used to bridge the income gaps. The government's move to close the income gap in the country is the right step in ensuring the well-being of the people and ensuring the sustainability of the country's economic growth in the future. Economist Dr. Muhammad Abdul Khalid said a country economics could not recover quickly from the crisis if there were imbalance in gap between the rich and the great poor.
Assalamualaikum and hello, my name is Nurshaza Yasmin. Metric number is S56187. I will explain about composition of external debt of emerging economies. Many emerging economies rely on external investor to hold a significant proportions of their debt. In some countries, even a significant proportion of the domestically held debt is denominated in foreign currency. Okay, four important dimensions are macroeconomic, public choice, debt servicing, and balance sheets. Okay, first dimension is macroeconomic. The difference between domestic and foreign borrowing in the short term is that government borrowing locally push up domestic interest rate and so crowd out private sector borrowing. In the short term, foreign borrowing tend to avoid this crowding out. Okay, crowding out effects. Okay. However, over time, as repayment rules, servicing foreign debt access a deflationary drag on the economy. Second is the public choice. Public choice dimension arise because the manners of financing deficit affect the political debates about their size. Okay, ensuring that the unpleasant consequence of heavy government borrowing are felt immediately may be more conducive to sober policy making that resulting to devise that postpone the pains. Okay, however, one consequence was that private sector borrowing who were crowded out of domestic capital market, so offshore funding in effect forcing the private sector to do what the public sector had avoided. Third is debt servicing. Okay, in emerging economy, the main incentive for government to make heavy use of foreign currency debt is simply that is minimize current interest costs. If the exchange rates is devaluates in such a crisis, the chips debt will become very expensive. This is a tendency for the weaker borrower to rely too heavily on short-term borrowing because the credit risk rate is usually lower. Okay, and last dimension is balance sheets. Okay, the nature of liability chosen depend on the nature of assets on the other side of the balance sheets. Okay, a possibility that the government may issue too little foreign debt from a national perspective rather than too much. Next is strategy to reduce the cost of government external debt. Okay, a preferable way of limiting interest costs is to offer an option that only pay when a country is going well. Okay, an additional advantage is that lenders will be involved in some burden sharing as they are exposed to capital loss on long-term bonds. Management of central government debt. The use of benchmark is becoming more common in debt management. Okay, the rationale is to maintain the external debt structure with debts of international reserve exports or the currency in the basket against which the local currency is picked or managed. Okay. Country without benchmarks often have guidelines such as limiting short term debt and matching foreign currency debt to reserve or limiting floating rate debt once a benchmark is established. Okay, how much discretion should be allowed the debt manager to deviate from the benchmark, while cost saving are possible from the judicious switchings between different maturity and currency. Local government also borrow substantially abroad. This debt is usually formally guaranteed by the national governments. In practice, decisions on the coordinations of debt issue are highly politically. Okay. Next is stress testing. Okay, such as approach has several weakness. Okay, the first is the exact result would be model dependence, made using alternative model and assessing the sensitivity of the result to certain key parameters. Second, this kind of analysis typically assume that shock are normally distributed. Okay, and third is covariance calculates during normal times may no longer any during extreme conditions and may be influenced by policy response.
Many countries in the ASEAN region, Malaysia has accumulated a number of external debt. Basically, foreign sources are required to improve the internal financial budgetary system and to fill the deficit in domestic financial resources for the advancement of the country's economic goal. External debt is described as borrowing money from outside the country. The Malaysian government has borrowed money from domestic and international sources. The Malaysian government finances its deficit through borrowing rather than printing money for the most part. After reaching the ideal debt level, the government is unable to pay its deficit by borrowing from the public or from overseas. This situation might lead to macroeconomic problems including debt traps and hyperinflation. Similarly, emerging countries are no exception, with the majority of them experiencing falling debt problem in the early 1980s. There was around RM609 billion in government debt, with statistics on maturity dates in 2020. To better control its financial flow, the government has been aggressively attempting to issue longer-term government debt. As a result, the majority of the existing debt will be payable in the future. In 2020, almost 61% of debt will be due in less than 5 years. Debt with a maturity of more than 15 years has climbed from 5% in 2018 to 18% in 2020. Meanwhile, debt with maturity less than 5 years has fallen from 51% in 2011 and to 39% now. Longer term often allow the government to defer principal payments. This alleviates the need to repay debt in the short term and allows the government to better plan its cash flow. This is one of the reasons why the government advocates for longer term debts and loans. It is now able to do so since its credit rating has stabilized over the last decade. Malaysia's independence in 1957 acted as a spur to growth. As the country assumed care of its own affairs, it continued to establish the aims and means required for a financial framework favorable to the current economic growth. The rise of Malaysia's economy has been critical to its transformation from a low-income to a high-income country. The Southern Asia country is shifting from a commodities and agriculture-based economy to a top exporter increasingly sophisticated goods. The World Bank, the International Bank for Reconstruction and Growth (IBRD), and the International Development Association (IDA) continue to support the country development as it opens up commerce and investment. Malaysia joined the World Bank on March 7, 1958. After a vote to initially join the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank continued to find areas of growth for the Malaysian economy. It emphasized the need to decrease poverty and income inequality Although the Malaysian economy has grown significantly, it still lags behind regional and national rivals of a comparable sort. Many World Bank loans to Malaysia have been for infrastructure development and relate to energy security and commerce. As a result, its first key project was the construction of a hydroelectric power station at Endam. Malaysia received its first IBRD loan in 1958. The proposed loan anticipates the IBRD providing 70% of finance for around 51.2 million. These monies were requested for the Cameron Highland District, which is around 100 miles from Kuala Lumpur, as part of a larger effort to build energy infrastructure. The hydroelectric power station built with the financing developed various local streams that ran across the plateau region. The completion of the project results in diversion strategies, new power plants, and a concrete dam. The project represents a stage increase in electricity needs. Malaysia continued to receive World Bank loans during the 1990s with the goal of assisting the state's development and diversifying the growth of its primarily agriculture and commodity-based economy. Following the receipt and utilization of IBRD financing, Malaysia chose to pursue relationship under a reimbursable adversary service structure (RAS). As a member of the IDA, Malaysia now engaged with the World Bank Group as an upper middle income economy. Besides that, during Prime Minister Najib Razak's term, China also invests 22 billion in Malaysian projects. Najib Razak paid a state visit to China on May 31, 2014 and was greeted by Chinese Premier Li Keqiang. China and Malaysia agreed to enhance bilateral commerce to 160 billion by 2017 and to expand economic and financial cooperation, particularly in halal food production, water processing, railway building, and port development. Malaysia is currently building several Chinese Belt and Road Initiative projects, including the East Cover Rail Line, Kuantan Port Expansion, Pahang Green Technology Park, Forest City, Robotic Future City, and Samalaju Industrial Park Steel Complex. China emerged as the largest investor in Malaysia, supporting enormous infrastructure projects across the country with massive investment, and the country became a platform for Chinese enterprise to reach ASEAN markets. Following the growth of Chinese economic influence in Malaysia, mainland Chinese gangs have been said to have expanded their illicit activities into Malaysia. Kit Wei Zeng, on the other hand, claimed that many of these initiatives result in considerable overcapacity. He thought they were entirely motivated by Chinese geopolitical objectives. Other than that, Malaysia also borrowed from Japanese yen. A yen loan is a financial aid plan with a low interest rate and a long payback period of 30 to 40 years. Yen loans also have the longest grace period, ranging from 5 to 10 years, with a maturity length ranging from 15 to 40 years. JBIC is the agency in charge of channeling yen loans, with only one project totaling JPY 692 million implemented during the first Malaysia plan. The total number of projects under the yen loan commitment increased to 6 projects totaling Japanese yen to 25,699 billion during the second Malaysia plan, and 17 projects totaling Japanese yen 76,298 billion during the third Malaysia plan. Despite the fact the total number of projects decreased to 13 during the 4th Malaysian Plan, 14 during the 5th Malaysian Plan, 11 during the 6th Malaysia Plan, and 10 during the 7th Malaysia Plan. The amount of yen loan channel increased to 154.7 billion Japanese yen. However, due to country current economy growth, the loan amount was lowered to Japanese yen 82.04 billion during the 8th Malaysia Plan and 7.644 billion during the 9th Malaysia Plan for one project. However, due to the yen increase phenomena, Dr. Mahali visited Tokyo in October 1988 and applied for further yen loans. He asked Japan to consider 2 points. First, that the subsequent yen loan be amortized in Malaysian ringgit, and second, that the exchange rate be reset after the loan agreement was signed and the loan transaction was complete. Takeshita, on the other hand, was opposed to the plan since it would result in change of OECF operational standard and significant challenges for ministry engaged in the Japanese ODA program. Takeshita, on the other hand, also consented in July 1989 to channel the loan at an effective transaction rate known as the Loan Sector and Development Loan to Malaysia. In February 1990, 7 months after the agreement was signed, Japan channeled the highest amount of loan package in the history of ODA distribution to Malaysia, amounting to 62.9 billion under the 13th loan package.
Has a maturity of more than a year. Long-term debt is an obligation that must be repaid, although it is recorded as an asset by the debtors. From 1988 to 2003, Tun Mahathir served as Malaysia's Prime Minister. The largest debt was RM153,236 in 2003, the final year of Tun Mahathir's presidency. This is due to the fact that the Asian financial crisis of 2002 was resolved in 2003. The establishment of the Dissolution Debt Restructuring Corporate Service (CDRC) in August 2002 was a watershed point in Malaysia's corporate restructuring strategy. Between 1998 and 2002, the company was only 4 years old. Under his leadership, the CDRC has resolved 48 cases totaling RM52.6 billion in debt, accounting for nearly 65% of all cases. Debt restructuring of course increased the sales of assets and non-core enterprise as well as management change. Laporan Ekonomi 2003. Short-term debt, often known as liabilities, refers to a company financial obligation that are due to be paid back within a year. Short-term debt includes things like short-term bank loan, accounts payable, wage payments, and unpaid income tax. The lowest amount of short-term debt during Tun Mahathir reign was RM7,900 to RM21 in 1989. In 1987, the greatest amount of debt was RM43,257. However, the debt was reduced by RM7,437 the next year. The Asian financial crisis was a financial crisis that began in Thailand in July 1997 and spread across Asia, affecting currencies, stock exchange, and other assets value. The Asia currency crisis is another name for the situation. Malaysia had a currency account deficit of more than 5% of GDP in 1997. The Malaysian ringgit was targeted by currency swindlers in July after the ringgit dropped. Malaysia fixed its currency on August 17, 1997. Malaysian debt rating was reduced by Standard and Poor's day later. Badawi served as Malaysia's Prime Minister for 8 years. During Tun Abdullah Ahmad Badawi reign, the greatest amount of long-term debt was RM156,574 in 28. In 27, however, the lowest figure was RM132,978. Even though the quantity of debtors increased, the trend was downward after the Great Commodities Recession of 1980 until 2000. The 2000 saw a commodity boom which keeps commodity price soaring once more. However, in 2008, the price of most commodities, particularly oil and food, putting the economy in jeopardy and threatening the stagflation and the globalization. Oil price hit 100 a barrel for the first time in January 2008, marking of the year's entire milestone. Oil price peaked at 147 per barrel in July. The short-term debt increased slightly after Tun Mahathir's rule was replaced by Tun Abdullah Ahmad Badawi rule. Malaysian shops began restriction cooking oil purchase in January 2008. After the government imposed restriction to address a shortage, press rumors are those to have prompted panic purchase of cooking oil. From Monday, rationing of 5 kg per client per purchase was meant to be implemented. The parliamentary opposition has slammed the regulation, claiming that the damage is to consumers and vendors. Last week, supermarket chefs in numerous Malaysian states were deprived of cooking oil due to a retailers' inability to refill supply quickly enough. A year after the power shift from Tun Abdullah Ahmad Barawi to Datuk Seri Najib DSN in 2009, the number of laundered debt rose sharply by RM 109,613 from 109,613 in 2003 to RM 257,273 in 2007. The European debt crisis occurred from late 2009-2011 when investors refused to invest because they refused to face the debt crisis. The crisis also caused the US debt crisis and spread to ASEAN countries. The subprime crisis caused many large companies in the US to have to bail out and expose their investment banks. In May 2011, this concern and loss of confidence issues faced in the wake of Greece debt refinancing. This is because the people of Greece reject the austerity measures and took the streets to express their protest until the riots broke out. The short-term graph illustrates that the year with the most debt during the Datuk Seri Najib the rule was 2017. This is because as of 13 January 2017, Bank Negara Malaysia's international reserve total USD 94.3 billion equivalent to RM 422.9 billion. The reserve position is 1.3 times the short-term foreign debt and can cover 8.7 months of retained imports. External short-term debt include short-term offshore borrowing, non-resident ownership of short-term ringgit debt securities, non-resident deposits in the banking system, and other short-term debt. Muhammad Tun M was Malaysia's only two-time Prime Minister. Tun M was re-elected to the throne for the second time in 3 years. The years with the highest long-term debt value during his reign was 2018. Malaysia's economic growth was predicted to normalize in 2018 after a strong year in 2017. During the year, however, the economy was beset with a number of external and domestic obstacles. Major policy and political developments resulting in part from global trade tensions and Malaysia's historic change of government were source of economic concerns. Malaysia's economic performance was negatively impacted by unanticipated supply interruptions in the commodity industries, resulting in a larger than expected deceleration in growth from 2018 to 2021. The short-term debt was reduced under Tun M's leadership. This is because, according to Bank Negara Malaysia (BNM), Financial Stability Review for the second half of 2021, Malaysia's current household debt to GDP is at 89% in December 2021, up from 89.6% in June 2021. The country's household debt to GDP ratio reached a new high of 93.2% in 2020. The reduced ratio as of the end of 2021 was primarily due to faster nominal GDP growth, according to BNM, but it remained on the upper end when compared to regional countries such as Singapore 69.7%, Indonesia 17.2%, and the Philippines 70.2%, 9.9% due to the current labour market slack and core inflation. BNM will begin to take policies in 2 hours 22. The new COVID-19 variety could jeopardize Malaysia's 22 prospect by causing more border closures, social distancing, measure and domestic restrictions. Malaysia is unexpected to be unaffected by Russia, Ukraine, since it has a diverse export that will continue to sustain its growth.
Tun Dr. Mahathir bin Mohamad. Tun Dr. Mahathir bin Mohamad was the fourth Prime Minister of Malaysia and held the position for 22 years from 1981 to 2003. He was born in 1925 in Alostam, Kedah, Malaysia. When Tun Dr. Mahathir took over the administration of his country, he inherited a long-term economic policy that had been planned by the previous Prime Minister, namely the new economic policy. Thus, the long-term administration period gives space to Dr. Mahathir Mohamad to implement the agenda by introducing new relevant economic policies, which is national development policies. Some of the Tun Dr. Mahathir's main policies that bring significant change to the development of the country. First, Look East policies. Among the success of the Look East policy was a national car project, the acceptance of the idea of incorporation and privatization, as well as transfer of construction expertise in Dayam Bumi building construction and the Penang Bridge. Second, incorporation policy. This success is the result of Malaysia's commitment to build good relations with Japan, and the Proton automotive industry technology has collaboration with Mitsubishi. Japan's national belief against national are high until the country acts to help Malaysia in various automobile and industrial sectors. Third, privatization policies. This policy also enables Malaysians to gain new technology and expertise through joint participation with foreign equity holder, management of preparation, contract consulting service. Next, this step will enable Malaysians on their own to operate, manage new technologies in specific areas as efficiency increase and productivity. Next, national industrial policy. Under the administration of Tun Dr. Mahathir, the country faced various obstacles, especially with the fall in commodity price as a result of the world economic recession. He therefore added to diversity economic activities by focusing on the development of export-based industry and heavy industry using a large-scale labor force. Last, foreign currency control 1998. This package was formulated by Datuk Sri Anwar Ibrahim with the full support of the cabinet. The implementation of the control was successful when Malaysia was able to regain control of the economy, and this delighted foreign investors with the appreciation of their share in the KLSE. Tun Abdullah bin Ahmad Badawi. Tun Abdullah Ahmad Badawi was born on 26 November 1939 in Kampung Perlis, Bayan Lepas, Penang. The short reign period is difficult to measure or evaluate the leadership of Tun Abdullah Ahmad Badawi, let alone to compare the short era of his reign with the era of Tun Dr. Mahathir Mohamad. In general, the period of 3 years show Tun Abdullah maintained many of the policy and mission of the past era and matching to the approach to the implementation of those policy and mission which does not conflict with the original objective. Some of the policies, which is first one, Mission National. Tun Abdullah Ahmad Badawi has introduced the national mission as complementary to the Vision 2020 dream. Effort towards achieving the goal by 2020 will be made with various challenges and difficulties given the socio-economic environment, local and international, are constantly changing. 15 years to come required hard work and high dedication to achieve the goal and set objectives. Second, National Integrity Plan (NIP). Tun Abdullah launched the NIP on 23 April 2004 in Putrajaya. The production of this plan is a comprehensive, long-term commitment from the inspiration of the people and leaders based on the fourth challenge of Vision 2020, that is, to form a society with strong moral and ethical characteristics, which is citizens having interest in religious and spiritual values and underpinned by noble character. Last, Human Capital Development. The Human Capital Development Program was introduced in 2005. Human capital means something that is used as a basis of expansion and the advantage it possesses. Human capital development is a mechanism in giving birth and developing the country based on technology and knowledge. Datuk Sri Muhammad Najib bin Tun Abdul Razak. Datuk Sri Muhammad Najib bin Tun Abdul Razak is the 6th Prime Minister of Malaysia. Najib who was born in Kuala Lumpur, Pahang on 23 July 1953, was the eldest son of the Tun Abdul Razak Hussein. Some of his policy: first, new economic model. Datuk Sri Najib Tun Abdul Razak announced the government's plan to develop a new economic model that will speed Malaysia's transition to a high-income country. The plan will emphasize ways to increase the income and productivity of workers by encouraging knowledge industry and increasing investment from overseas. Second, economic liberalization. Malaysia has implemented measures to attract and maintain foreign investment, including a moderation of preference designed to benefit ethnic Malays. Specifically, this reform includes allowing foreign investors to hold majority stake in most enterprises, excluding strategic industries such as banking, telecommunication, energy, insurance regulation, strengthening power of the foreign investment community, and lowering the minimum quota for Malay ownership. Third, reform of government subsidies. Datuk Sri Najib has started to implement comprehensive reform of government subsidies. On 19 July 2010, subsidy for petrol, diesel and LPG were cut as part of Malaysia's general program of reducing and elimination subsidy per the Trans-Malaysia Plan and the new economic model. The government believes it will save Ringgit Malaysia 750 million by the end of 2010 through this measure with the little negative impact on most citizens. 4. Free trade agreement. Datuk Sri Najib has aggressively promoted the free trade, and his government has implemented 3 free trade agreements. These include the Asian FTA, Asian Australian New Zealand FTA, and Asian Indian FTA in goods. Under Najib's government, Malaysia signed a free trade agreement with the New Zealand on 26 October 2009 and to take effect 1 August 2010. Last, stimulus package. The Malaysian government passed 2 stimulus packages to mitigate the effect of the global economic turndown. The first stimulus package, worth 7 billion ringgit Malaysia, was announced on 4 November 2008. The second package, worth 60 billion ringgit Malaysia, was announced on 10 March 2009. The 7th Prime Minister of Malaysia witnessed Dr. Mahathir bin Mohamad return to lead the new government under the party, and the nuances are different from before. Following his appointment as Prime Minister, Mahathir promised to restore the rule of law and make elaborate and transparent investigation into the One Malaysia Development Berhad scandal. He abolished the unpopular goods and service tax, reducing it from 6 to 0%. Tun Dr. Mahathir also voted to cut fiscal spending by firing thousands of civil servants, cancelling an expensive Kuala Lumpur-Singapore high-speed rail link, and cutting back on large infrastructure projects. Mahathir announced the Shared Prosperity Vision 2030 in October 2019, which set out to increase the income of all ethnic groups, to increase focus on the technology sector, and for Malaysia to become a high-income country by 2030. Under Tun Dr. Mahathir's current leadership, Malaysia takes a more liberal and friendly approach to managing its foreign policy. As a great trading nation, Tun Dr. Mahathir wants Malaysia to be friendly to all countries and enemy to none.
From year 1987 to 1999, guidelines and strategies to repair and restore the banking system were established in 1987. The central bank evaluated the interest rate structure and limit on the base lending rate BLR were repealed in February 1991. The BLR and interest rate decreased further in accordance with the market, and the disparity between average lending rates to commercial banks' average cost of fund narrowed more in the early 1990s. To level the playing field, the statutory reserve requirement (SRR) was amended in 1989 to a single consistent rate applicable to all commercial banks, merchant banks, and other financial institutions. This requirement was also used by the central bank as an effective instrument for monetary management and inflationary expectation. The central bank had to ensure that hiking interest rate to limit the consumption would not hinder investment. As part of their plan, the BNM infrared the currency market. When foreign interest rate fell, local interest rate fell, but the disparity remained. BNM also employed huge amounts of direct short-term borrowing from the interbank money markets to sterilize the enormous inflow of cash. Malaysia's government papers were released to avoid additional interest rate cuts. In 1993, they were supplemented by a series of Bank Negara Bills (BNB) and Malaysia Saving Bonds. However, short-term inflow continued, and such funds often result in an instantaneous rise in the monetary base without a commensurate increase in fixed assets. The volatility of these funds causes the insecurity in both the domestic and international markets. Malaysia also used moral suasion to prevent excessive lending for speculation, encourage long-term funding based on viability rather than collateral, and expand lending to priority industries. By the second half of 1994, interest rate differential between the United States and the rest of the world had decreased and even become negative, resulting in a net outflow of short-term capital. In response, direct control were removed. The BLR framework was changed again in 1995 with the goal of improving the BLR's response to money market circumstance and the financial system's liquidity status. This was done to improve the efficiency of institutions. During 1997 to 1999, Malaysian monetary policy was severely tested by the spillover of the regional financial crisis, which resulted in a sharp decline in the external value of ringgit, a severe contraction of economic activity, and an associated deterioration of the health of the financial system. The nature of the crisis has created an exacerbated tensions among important policy objectives, including fostering economic development, sustaining low inflation, providing a favorable exchange rate environment for the export industry, and safeguarding the financial system's health. Policy response to this crisis have included a wide range of initiatives, including the development of new policy instruments to achieve many goals at the same time. From late September 1997 to early February 1998, the stance of monetary policy steadily firm as BNM worked to mitigate the inflationary repercussion of the ringgit revaluation, as well as to prevent capital outflow that continued to exert downward pressure on the currency. BNM support a minor firming on 3-month interbank rates by roughly 100 basis points between September and November. In October, this was supplemented by the introduction of publicly publicized objective for reducing total loan growth until end of 1998. BNM also imposed tight lending limitation for property development and also purchase in December. Continuing currency pressures, as represent the interest disparity between onshore and offshore ringgit interest rates, also contribute to the firming of domestic interest rate through early 1998, with the 3-month interbank rate climbing another 250 basis points to 11% in early February. The impact of increasing interbank rates on retail lending rates was mitigated in part by a lowering in the SRR in mid-February. Despite BMN actions to mitigate the overall effect of the SRR shift on system liquidity, the fall in SRR cut the cost of funding to financial institutions, limiting the rise in lending rates. Monetary policy remained strong but did not tighten further from February to July 1998. The weakening of domestic activity and dramatic drop in loan for property construction and share purchases, as well as the depreciation of the US dollar versus regional currencies, remove upward pressure on interest rates. The banking industry's 1998 loan growth target 8% has been reaffirmed for 1999. The aim was applied flexibly in 1998 with exceptions for banks and in financial crises where more lending would have jeopardized responsible behavior. As a result, the bank lending objective was significantly missed. Total loans, including MPS transferred to Dana Harta, grew by only 1.3% in 1998. However, commercial banks achieved loan growth of 7.1% within this total, although this was countered by large drop in lending by troubled financial business. For 1999, BNM has said that the meeting objective should not jeopardize sound lending standards. In 2004, monetary policy will remain more accommodating in order to stimulate domestic activity, notable consumption and investment spending. Furthermore, measures will be taken to manage further liquidity situation so that these resources may be utilized to finance economic activity more effectively. The government will continue to maintain the low interest rate regime in order to reduce company costs. However, the government is concerned about the impact of this policy on the depositors because the country has a high saving rate of 34% of GDP. As a result, it is recommended that Bank Negara Malaysia issue savings bonds to assist people who rely on saving income, mainly pensioners aged 55 and above. These bonds will have characteristics such as higher yields than saving interest rates and income tax reduction. At 2009 Monetary Policy Committee MPC meeting, the BNM decided to lower the OPR by 50 basis points to 2%. The OPR ceiling and floor rates have been changed to 2.45% and 1.75% respectively for the corridor. Beginning March 1, 2009, the statutory reserve requirement (SRR) was cut from 2% to 1%, significantly lowering the cost of intermediation. With inflation on the decline, the goal of macroeconomic policy is to boost domestic demand until global economic conditions improve. The bank will take additional steps to ensure continuous loan access and to lessen the impact of the economic downturn on specific group of people.
First 5 year of Datuk Sri Najib Tun Abdul Razak rules, in 2018 the debt was increased drastically. In that year, the monetary policy was focused on preserving economic growth, reducing inflationary risk, and keeping financial imbalance from accumulating. In the first half of 2011, Malaysia's economy increased healthily, maintaining the pace set in 2010. Inflation is expected to be higher this year than last, owing primarily to supply concern and to a lesser extent domestic demand pressures. The need to further normalize interest rate and respond to the risk to macroeconomic stability presented by irregular and substantial portfolio movement dominated monetary policy in the first half of the year. However, when global economic and financial conditions worsen, the downside risk to domestic economic growth increased considerably in a second part of the year, while the positive risk to inflation began to fade. Given the balance of risk, the Monetary Policy Committee (MPC) assessed that the existing overnight policy rate OPR level was reasonable and chose to maintain it for the remainder of the year. Monetary policy was focused on preserving price stability while keeping monetary circumstances favorable for long-term domestic growth. This occurred amid a challenging policy environment marked by large shift in the balance of risk to the domestic economy and high volatility in financial market. Due to a mix of external concerns such as weaker than expected global growth momentum and policy uncertainty in the US and PR China, the risk to domestic growth has shifted to the downside by mid-year. For 3 years of Tun Dr. Mahathir's second rules, 2018 is the highest long-term debt. In 2018, the Monetary Policy Committee (MPC) normalized the degree of monetary accommodation at its January 2018 meeting by hiking the overnight policy rate OPR by 25 basis points to 3.25%. The MPC stated that the economic condition that triggered the prior OPR reduction in July 2016 had significantly improved. The MPC showed interest in revisiting the degree of monetary accommodation in its November 2017 monetary policy statement. The domestic economy continued to show signs of strength and endurance in early 2018 following a 5.9% increase the previous year. Domestic growth was expected to range between 5.5 and 6.0%. Global growth is expected to be unevenly distributed among areas. The government's fiscal position will be improved by pursuing progressive fiscal reduction while continuing to boost growth, reduce debt and liabilities, and promote economic inclusiveness. Similarly, the medium-term fiscal plan outlined the path to consolidation with fiscal balance of 2019 and 2020 aiming for negative 3.4% and negative 3.0% of GDP, respectively. The path to fiscal reduction is anchored by a number of substantial reform efforts. First, the government is committed to increase the efficiency of government spending by implementing zero-based budget and enacting the Government Procurement Act. Second, diversifying and broadening the revenue stream was prioritized. The Tax Reform Committee (TRC), which was established to comprehensively analyze the taxing system, proposed a number of options in the 2019 budget. Third, the government established a debt and liabilities management committee, announced the creation of a debt management office, and pledged to implement accurate accounting by 2021 in order to promote comprehensive and transparent debt management. Dr. Mahathir rules in 2020, Bank Negara Malaysia Monetary Policy Committee (MPC) vote to keep the overnight policy rate OPR at 1.75%. Thanks to increases in manufacturing and export activity, the global economy is currently improving. Economic activity has increased in the majority of advanced and regional economies. According to the most current data, with a more evident resurgence in PR China, recent surges of COVID-19 cases, on the other hand, have caused some major economies to restore containment measures, albeit less stringent than in the past. The MPC consider the current monetary policy stand to be appropriate and accommodative. The 125 basis point drop in the OPR this year will keep the economy humming. The MPC will continue to assess shifting conditions and their implications for the overall inflation and GDP outlook in the United States. The bank is committed to utilize its policy levers as needed to foster long-term economic recovery.
This section talk about methodological issues that are related to estimation, calculations, and testing for models that involve structural change. With that, the purpose of this section is to review developments as they relate to econometric applications based on linear model. As we know, the data that we use is time series data. So the model that's suitable for our group to run the data is structural break. Okay, what are structural breaks? Okay, structural break is a concept in econometrics. A structural break appears when we see an unexpected shift in a time series. Why we test for structural break? It is to test for the parameter stability because of instability in parameters may lead to a misrepresentation of result. There are several breakpoint tests that can be used, such as Chowkey test, single breakpoint test, and also multiple breakpoint test. But since we could not know how many and where the breakpoints were, the multiple breakpoint test was used. The results show that there have 4 breakpoints in long-term external debt Malaysia, which is in 1997, 2004, 2011, and 2006. While for short-term external debt Malaysia, there have 2 breakpoints that we can get from the data that have been run, which is at 2007 and 2013. The data also shows that there have 4 breakpoints in total of external debt Malaysia, which is at 1997, 2004, 2011, and also 2006. After running all of the variables together, the result that we can get is the breakpoint of this model is at 2011, which significant level at 0.05. After adding the dummy variable, the result shows that the dummy variable is significant at 0.000, with the significant level of this model is 0.05. In conclusion, we can add the dummy variable for breakpoint in 2011 because it is an effective model.
In conclusion, the effectiveness of debt management depends on the appropriateness of macroeconomic policy. The history of external debt and the macroeconomic policy in Malaysia from 1988 until 2020 show an increasing exponential debt during the years. And the macroeconomic policy show that it contributes well to the external debt of Malaysia for each year. And utilizing Malaysia external debt data from the 1988 until 2020, the results show that the Malaysia external debt keep increasing for each year, but the trend might be different from year to year. Therefore, the structure break is used to analyze the trend of Malaysia borrowing from other countries. And the structure breaks indicates 4 breaks points for the total external debt and for long-term debt, which is in 1997, 2011, 2004 and 2016. And for the short-term external debt contains only 2 breakpoints, which is in 2013 and 2017. This implies that the policymakers can focus on the monetary variable in assessing and managing the level of external debt in the long run. And in our opinion, Malaysia should develop debt governance program to pursue debt target policies or any regulation to enhance a strong public financial system that essential for the Malaysia to achieve the solvency in its external debt position for the next future.